Welcome to Lecture 2 of Cannabis and the Law. And what we'll do in this one, we'll talk about first some definitions of what is a felony, what does possession mean, what is drug trafficking, and then we'll talk about drug arrests and how the United States stacks up to other countries. So first, some definitions. If something is illegal, it's whatever penalty the law says there is, but we can classify it as a misdemeanor or a felony. A misdemeanor is more minor. All right, it's different in every state, but most states define a misdemeanor as a more minor crime. It might result in a fine, but community service, or a jail sentence less than a year, while a felony is considered more serious and you can get punishable by at least a year in prison. So some typical drug crimes. Possession. Possession is when a person knowingly or intentionally has a controlled substance without a valid prescription. So it's not just for, I guess heroin and cocaine. It could be for Xanax. It could be for a controlled substance, so something that's in the, it's scheduled and you don't have a valid prescription for it. And it could also be for illegal substances. Now, simple possession typically is going to be with small quantities of the substance, and that's, some states have different standards for that, but it's not just quantities of the drug. It could be that you're in possession of the chemicals or accessories that you use to manufacture the drugs, or it could be that you have drug paraphernalia. I hope you still know who Tommy Chong is, Cheech and Chong. He got arrested a number of years ago. He went to prison because his family made bongs. They made glass bongs. And it's an accessory. He went to jail for it, I think mostly because it's Tommy Chong, and it was a very high-profile arrest. The administration saying, we're not messing around, we're tough on drugs. So that's typical simple possession. It could be for small amounts of the drug or the things that make it or you use it with. You know, a roach clip could be something you get arrested for. Here I also want to mention civil forfeiture. What this is the government can seize property or assets that belong to the person suspected of committing a crime. So they can suspect that you have marijuana, and if you're on your boat, they take your boat. They've taken houses. There was one guy who they just suspected him of being a drug trafficker. He wasn't. And he had money from his church that he was transporting. They took all the church money. So they can take your assets. They can take your car, your house, your boat. They could take your stuff if they can just say, we suspect that this car or house or boat was either bought with drug money or was used in a crime, that somebody smoked a joint on the boat. And it's very difficult to get your stuff back. And it doesn't have to be your own stuff. If you smoke a joint in grandma's house, they can take grandma's house. That has happened. It doesn't happen as much now, but that has happened. And it's hard to get your stuff back. And the police who seize your assets get to sell it at auction, and they get to keep the money. So there's a lot of drive for the police to say, oh, I suspect that you're using a drug. I'm taking your car and I'm going to sell it and use the money to fund my police station. So this is a thing, just to be aware of it. All right, so simple possession. Possession with intent to distribute. This is going to be stiffer penalties, and this is going to be if you have a lot of drugs, you have a lot of packaging material or large amounts of money or communications from customers. They can make some assumptions that nobody has this much weed, you must be a dealer. So, and a lot of it depends on who you are, what color you are, what state you're in. All these things can affect it. I also want to mention actual possession versus constructive possession, because this is an important safety tip here. In Lee County, the difference between actual possession and constructive possession, they can prosecute them differently. Actual possession, it is on you. You had a bag of cocaine in your pocket. You had weed on you. Constructive, it's not right there on your person. Let's say you're in a car with 5 people and there's a big bag of weed. It's in the center console. If nobody says, hey, that's my weed, they can't prove it's yours. They can, and probably will, arrest you. They can't prosecute you for it. So get an attorney, know your rights, don't speak, don't say, yes, that's my weed. If everyone denies it who's in the car and no, it's not on anybody's person, then they can't prosecute for that. All right. Some more definitions. Drug trafficking. That's the unauthorized manufacturing, distribution, or sale of any controlled substance. And this, if you simply hand a package of drugs to somebody, that can be considered distribution, even if no money has been exchanged. And this has happened. It can go even farther than that. Mark Young, I think he's still in prison with no possibility of parole. He was convicted of conspiracy of drug trafficking. What Mark did, I believe this was in Illinois, he introduced somebody who wanted to buy weed to somebody else who wanted to sell weed. That was it. He didn't touch it. He didn't get any money. He didn't get any weed. He didn't do anything. He introduced 2 people, one who wanted to buy, one who wanted to sell. They both turned state's evidence, and he was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Laws are getting easier. So we don't, I won't say we don't see this anymore because we still have unfair drug laws, but we don't see as many cases like this as we did back under Bill Clinton, honestly, in the 90s. And back from the 80s to the early 90s, we saw a lot of this. All right, some more definitions. Decriminalization and legalization. I'll put these up together. Decriminalized. When you decriminalize, let's say, cannabis, it doesn't mean it's legal. The law remains. Cannabis remains illegal, but the penalties are either reduced or removed. So when states have decriminalized cannabis, oh, okay, it's a $10 fine, or it's like a parking ticket. You're not going to jail for it. So the penalties are reduced or removed if something is decriminalized. If something is legalized, then the criminal penalties are removed and the drug can be regulated and taxed. So that's going to be a source of income. So alcohol and tobacco are legal. They're regulated. You have to be a certain age to get it. And they are taxed heavily. And they're safer. You don't see people really setting up moonshine stills in their backyard. You don't see people growing their own tobacco because it's easier. Now, cannabis is going to be different. People will grow their own. But once it's legalized, which one day it will be. But when it's legalized, it can be regulated and taxed. So some more questions for you. And please, let's talk about this on Zoom, and please post these on Facebook. What do you think? Respond to other people's thoughts as well. What are the advantages and disadvantages to decriminalizing a drug versus legalizing a drug? And let's just talk with cannabis. What would be the advantages and disadvantages? And what penalties, if any, should there be for use? And does it depend on the drug? So should there be different penalties for use with cannabis versus, let's say, we legalize heroin or psilocybin? That's a really interesting one that I do believe is going to be moved in the next year or two from Schedule 1. How available should it be? So if we're talking cannabis, should there be an age limit? Where should you be able to get it? How should we tax it? And then where do those tax revenues go? So these are all really cool questions, and I want you to think about them, and please post about them because I want to talk about them. Anyway, we will close this one out. Oh, we got a little bit, but we'll talk about some punishments. In 2019, there were 663,000 arrests just for marijuana in the United States, and 90% of those, actually it's now 92%, 92% were for possession. And that's one arrest every 48 seconds, mostly for possession of marijuana. And surprisingly, the arrests for marijuana possession have increased over the last 4 years. As more and more states legalize cannabis, both medicinally, and so we're up to 33 states medicinally, and I think 11 states that it's a legal adult use, we're seeing more arrests for cannabis possession. Why? Post that as well. What's going on there? Now, the actual arrest rates for cannabis users are low compared to the number of users. What I mean by this is 90% of people who use cannabis are not getting arrested for it. There are millions of marijuana users. They're not all getting arrested. So the actual arrest rate, considering how many people use it, it's fairly low. And most are convicted of just simple possession. And a lot of times you get either a fine or you get the choice to go to rehab rather than going to jail. But these drug penalties are not administered equally across the population. And this really started under Reagan. The incarceration of minorities just began to skyrocket. And drug laws are racially motivated. They just are. Look at these numbers. All right, this is drug use. Percentage of the population that admits to using drugs. Whites more than blacks. How many sell? Pretty even. But how many get arrested or incarcerated for drug use? So whites are actually using drugs more than black people do. But black people are significantly 2 to 3 times as likely to be arrested for drug-related crimes. Significantly, is it like 6 times more likely to be put in jail for it? So it's not applied equally across the population. It is racial. For those born in the year 2001, your lifetime likelihood of being imprisoned, if you're a male, it's 1 in 9. If you're a female, it's 1 in 56. Let's go back to males. Overall is 1 in 9. If you're white, you have a lifetime likelihood of imprisonment of 1 in 17. If you're Hispanic, 1 in 6. And if you're black in America, 1 in 3. All right, so this is going to be drug arrests for whites and blacks. In America, the U.S. has a higher higher percentage of its population in prison than any other country. Any other country. We're number 1. We are 4.4% of the world population and 25% of the prison population. And this also just struck me. It's not related as far as I know, unless there's some other factor, which could be. We're 4.4% of the world's population and 25% of COVID cases as well. All right. So looking at the numbers, I mean, we have a higher percentage of our population in prison than any other country. We're always number 1 or number 2. In the last couple of years, we've been number 1. But our rates are actually going down. They are diminishing in the last few years. Less crime. There's some changes in sentencing. There's some changes in drug possession. So they've changed the laws in a number of states. So sometimes it's changed from a felony to a misdemeanor. So we are seeing less people in prison overall, but we are still by far number 1. And with that thought, I will, wait, nope, I still have a little more. I lied to you. I have a little more to do. I'm going to talk about collateral consequences. If you get arrested for a drug crime, in addition to going to jail or prison or having hefty fines, there are a number of collateral consequences that can ruin your life. And these just include, so some additional penalties if you're convicted in some states, and different from state to state. You may lose or have your professional license suspended. Attorney, physician, pharmacist, forget it, you're done, you lost your license. Psychologists, social workers, architects, paramedics, midwives, CPA, accountants, contractors or electricians, plumbers, hairstylists, taxi drivers, funeral directors, Among others. These are professional licenses. So you may lose your license if you're convicted of drug offense. And in 20 states, it's possible to lose your professional license based on a misdemeanor drug conviction, such as possession of marijuana. So be aware of that. You may have your driver's license suspended for at least 6 months, and this will happen in Florida. So you can lose your driver's license. You can lose student aid, student loans. So any drug conviction, even misdemeanor possession, can result in the loss of federal aid, student loans, some scholarships, and drug offenses are the only crimes that result in this. You know, you could be arrested for other things and not lose your student loans. Let's see, loss of welfare benefits. And this was Bill Clinton signed this legislation in that allowed states to deny public housing and food stamps to those who are convicted of felony drug offenses. And who is this going to affect? This is going to affect the children of people who get caught with drugs. They're going to be homeless, they lose their house, lose their food. And this again is imposed for no other offenses other than drug crimes. You can go kidnap somebody, and your children won't lose their housing. You can murder somebody and your children won't lose their food stamps, but this is for drug laws. All right, in 31 states, drug-related felonies will result in you being barred from voting for at least some time. And in 9 states, this can last for life. And in some states, you will not be allowed to adopt if you were convicted of even of a misdemeanor for cannabis. So we got some harsh drug laws, but it hasn't really reduced drug use in America. Now has it? We have some of the highest rates of some drug use. We're number 1 for cocaine. We're number 1 for opioids, tied with one other country. We are by far the highest Ritalin use. We're up in the top for cannabis. I think Israel's number 1. I think we're number 2. But we got some really high drug use, yet really harsh laws, and those laws haven't served to reduce drug loss. Post that as well. Why do you think? What's going on? And we will talk about that more as we get on in this section.